Hi everyone, I'm Liz, and welcome back to Elizabeth Ann Can Stitch. Today's video is going to be a quilt parade. I have been quilting now for almost 2 decades, which is a long time, and I want to just show you guys some of the completed quilts that I've made over the years. The earliest one I have to show you in this video is from 2008, so it'll be 2008 to present, and yeah, I'm just going to talk through each quilt as I show it to you, kind of who I made it for, why I made it, the pattern or fabric line, if I can remember those things, and yeah, I just hope it gives you a little bit of quilty inspiration, and it's fun to see, you know, a trip down memory lane for me, and maybe for you, for some fabrics that you forgot existed or were super popular at the time I made it. So yeah, let's just get started. First up is a quilt from 2008 that I made for my sister Allison's 18th birthday. Don't do the math, but she turns 30 this year. Sorry, Al. So I used a pattern from this book. This is Denyse Schmidt's Quilts book. I think this is the first quilt book she released in, let me see if it has a year. Oh, and I did get her to sign it. I met Denyse Schmidt at QuiltCon. I took a class from her at QuiltCon. The very first QuiltCon, was it 2012 or 14? 2012 maybe? I can't remember, but the very first QuiltCon was held in Austin, and I took a lot of classes, and yeah, I'm kind of a fangirl of Denyse Schmidt, so I took my book in and got her to sign it. But the quilt, the very first quilt I made from it, was this one, the Big Zig, kind of a Charlie Brown-esque type pattern. And yeah, I just made it with pinks and browns, which, you know, was kind of my favorite color combo at the time, and I thought Allison would like it. And I made it in a twin extra long size so she could take it with her to college the following year and use it in her dorm room. So that's the Big Zig. Oh, I do want to mention that the Big Zig quilt is the first quilt that I ever long-armed. I rented time from a woman who had a long arm machine in her garage. She showed me how to use the machine, and I free motion quilted that Big Zig quilt, and it was great, and I was hooked immediately. And so almost every single quilt that you'll see in this parade, I have personally long arm quilted. I think there's just 2 that I sent out. I've only ever sent 2 quilts out to be quilted. No, 3, sorry. I've sent 3 quilts out to be quilted. And those are included in here, but, and I'll try to point them out, but otherwise, just assume I long armed it myself, usually free motion, but as you get towards the end of the quilt parade, if you see some more complicated quilting, then I probably used a computerized pattern to quilt those. Next up is a quilt featuring Amy Butler. Oh, I wish I could remember the fabric line, but it was an Amy Butler fabric line. It's around the same time, 2008, maybe 2009. And this one was a quilt kit. And I believe I purchased it at Quilt Market in Houston, or the big international quilt show. But I think I purchased it from my local quilt store, which is Honeybee Quilt Shop, but just at Quilt Market, which is kind of silly, but I was there and I visited their booth, and they had made these kits. Just, you know, they're very popular, right? Like all the prepackaged, pre-cut even. I think the fabrics were pre-cut. The quilt store was doing that at the time. I don't think they do that anymore, but it was great. Like I just literally had to assemble this quilt into kind of its big, chunky, irregular blocks, and I love it. Again, kind of a pink, brown, green theme, and this is one of my quilts that I keep at home. So, and it's one of the earliest ones, or it's the earliest one, I guess, that I still have at my house. Next up, we have a rail fence quilt that I made around 2009 for my mom. I used a Moda jelly roll, which, as I recall, were brand new at the time, or fairly new. This was my first jelly roll that I'd ever purchased, and just some really pretty kind of reds, pinks, blues, tans, just a Moda floral. I don't remember the fabric line now, and I'm sure you can't find it. But yeah, just did a simple rail fence block on this one. And that was the first quilt I ever made for my mom. Next up is this fun, bright, cheerful quilt that I started probably back around the 2009 timeframe, and I didn't actually get it quilted until maybe 2014, but I just included it at the beginning because all of these fabrics are great. Denyse Schmidt Flea Market Fancy and Heather Ross and Heather Bailey and Amy Butler, just some of my favorite prints that I had floating around my sewing room at the time, and I turned it into this simple little quilt, and it lives with my sister in Dubai. I gave it to her for her daughter Sophia. So next up is one of my all-time favorite quilts. I could probably say that about everything. This quilt lives with me. This is mine, and it is from the book The Practical Guide to Patchwork by Elizabeth Hartman. I have made several Elizabeth Hartman quilts. I love it. I love her. I love her patterns. And let me show you. So this one is the Superstar quilt. So this one is really just a take on the Sawtooth Star quilt block with just a little bit of added detail in the center of the block. And I had a lot of fun putting this one together. I used the Heather Bailey Nicey Jane fabric line. So I think this one is probably around 2012 or 2013. And I laid out the whole, I think I got a fat quarter bundle, and I laid out all the fabrics and matched them up with each other. I think you needed 3 fabrics per block. So I mixed in some solids, all of my Nicey Jane, and I pre-cut everything. And then I grouped the fabric in, like, basically all the fabric for one block into a Ziploc bag, and just one at a time, when I had time, made a block until I had a whole quilt top full of blocks, put them together. I wanted mine to be a little bit bigger than the amount of blocks I had. So I did add that really pretty big floral mum border, which I love. And then you might be noticing I do weird things on my quilt back sometimes, especially early on. I was a very thrifty quilter, and if I had a big piece of yardage, you know, I would start with that and then add on other things, and I would add on extra quilt blocks and whatever else I felt like throwing into the mix to get myself to a completed and big enough back. So I have a lot of fun with my quilt backs. Next up is a quilt for my dad, and this is made from fabrics from kind of a secondhand fabric store that used to be open near my parents' house. I miss it dearly. We think it was only open for a year, and I think bought all that place's inventory between my mom and my sisters and I, and I'm pretty sure that's where these quilt fabrics came from. And we just did a simple 4-patch with sashing. I say we because I don't know, I'm having trouble remembering. I think my mom put most of it together, but I did do the long arm quilting on it. I don't know, Mom, you can correct me in the comments. Did I put it together? Did I piece the top, or did you? I don't remember. But anyways, yeah, that's my quilt for my dad. Next up is another one of my favorites that lives at home with me. And this quilt, I keep looking off to the side because I have the pictures of the quilts up in front of me. This quilt reminds me of Vans sneakers, or kind of like cutesy skateboard 90s culture with all the fun, just kind of brightly colored squares. This quilt came about because I found this amazing piece of fabric from Denyse Schmidt, and I wish I remembered what the fabric line was, although I'm sure it's, you know, not to be found anymore. But I found this amazing floral, and I just love the colors in it. And I think at this point, well, yeah, I think at this point I hadn't really made a solids only quilt before. Even the Big Zig quilt had some prints in the zigzag stripes. And so I really wanted to make an all solids quilt, and I just love the colors of that floral fabric. So I think I bought 6 colors of solid Kona solids. So to make the quilt, I just cut out 3.5-inch squares of all of the solid colors and assembled them into 9-patch blocks, and then assembled the quilt top. And I used the floral on the back with some of the leftover squares to kind of add interest and, you know, make the back big enough, basically. And this one is just a little lap size quilt for the couch, and I love it. I love the bright colors and how much it reminds me of a retro Van sneaker. Next up is a quilt pattern that if you've been quilting for a while, you've probably seen. This one was called the New Wave, or it is called the New Wave Quilt by Elizabeth Hartman. And it was a free pattern on her blog. I think she sells it now, but yeah, it was just so cool and interesting and different at the time, and I know a lot of people made them. I've actually made two. You'll see another one later on, but this one I gave to my sister Lynn for Christmas a long time ago. And so she sent me pictures from Dubai. This next quilt is a t-shirt quilt, and I have to say I was merely a consultant on this project. My sister wanted to make this t-shirt quilt for her husband, who went to UT for college and had all of these t-shirts piled up, and she really wanted to make a t-shirt quilt. I had never made one. My mom had never made one. So, you know, we went to Joann's and picked out some coordinating fabrics, and figured out a plan. So the plan was to cut these big blocks, stabilize them, and then sash everything to make it a little easier to sew together. And they both really sewed the quilt together. I just long arm quilted it after consulting with them on how to put it together. And I think they did a great job. And yeah, it's a really, really huge, cool, well-loved, I think Ryan uses it all the time, t-shirt quilt. So yeah, that one was really cool. Next up is another one of my quilts that lives with me here at my house, and it is just super basic. I think they're maybe 8" by 4" rectangles of my favorite cotton and steel prints. I made this one in 2014 or 15, and Cotton and Steel had just released their first line of fabrics. I think if you quilt, you probably know, but Cotton and Steel, the designers, are now Ruby Star Society. But when they first came out with as a group, they were Cotton and Steel. So I took pieces from all of my favorite fabrics from the first line of Cotton and Steel, including those horses, the Mustangs, and the flowers and the origami, and just all of my favorites, and just made a really simple quilt to just show off those fabrics, and added a couple borders to it, and it was super simple and easy to put together, and I love it. This next quilt is a little bit random. This was a gift from my sister and her husband. Their last initial starts with H, and I was playing around in my quilt room. I think I was drawing out different quilt blocks and just trying to think of something new and cool, and I don't know, just something I wanted to make. And I was drawing some blocks out, and I realized that looks like an H. And then I realized that you could kind of fit H's together. I mean, you can see it in the quilt. And I just was like, how cool is that? And I had a really cool piece of cotton and steel fabric. And again, I pulled the solids from that piece of cotton and steel and made a huge H quilt and gave it to Ryan and Allison for their couch, and they love it. Okay, so next up is another one of my favorites, and this is my little nephew Charlie's birth quilt, baby quilt. I gave it to my sister for her baby shower, and I just loved making it. I used a fabric line. I wish I could remember what it was called, but it was just filled with dinosaurs and constellations and crystals and rocks and I don't know, just all kinds of cool stuff, like sciencey stuff. And I really wanted to do this kind of like, not a petri dish, but like it's a modified snowball block. That's what it is. It's just a snowball block. But I just wanted them to look like their own individual little specimens and own little things, because each print is so kind of big and vibrant, and I just wanted to mix them all together and just make it a cool looking quilt. I love how it turned out. I didn't use a pattern for this one. I just modified a snowball block, added sashing with the cornerstones, and I love it. Next up is Charlie's baby quilt that my mom pieced together and that I long arm quilted with some really sweet little blue fabrics that she found. And then this next one is a quilt that I made for Sophia, my first little niece. So this lives in Dubai with my sister Lynn and her husband and daughters. And I just love this quilt. I didn't use a pattern. I did use a quilt block, and I can't remember the name of the quilt block. I think it might have been a part of some kind of modern block along blog thing that I'm not remembering now, but I really like the block, and I just pulled all kinds of fun cute fabrics, a lot of cotton and steel, I think. Actually, yeah, now looking at it, it is, I think, all cotton and steel. I think I got a fat 1/8 bundle of one of the lines that I liked that year from cotton and steel. This would have been in 2015. And yeah, I love it. I did do, I free motion quilted this, and I did a kind of cool thing, I think, where I quilted the plus sign part separately, and then I went and filled in the background with little circles or little pebbles to kind of give it an interesting texture, and I think it turned out really cool. Of course, it was a little more time consuming, but it was just a baby quilt, so it was fun to experiment on that one. This next one is the first Christmas quilt I ever made, and I made it for my sister Allison, and it is so cool. It is from, I think, the very first cotton and steel Christmas fabric line mixed in with some solids. And again, this was the same as the cotton and steel one I showed you that I made for myself a while back, where it was just the rectangles, except this time I just oriented them vertically instead of horizontally and made a super fun, bright, vibrant Christmas quilt. So this next one is one I made for my sister Lynn, and it lives in Dubai with her. And this is a tradition I started. I don't know why I put work on myself, but I decided that as the oldest for my younger sisters, for all of their 30th birthdays, I would make them whatever quilt they wanted. I was like, you tell me what you want and I'll make you whatever quilt you want. There'll be no timeline. I won't have it done by your 30th birthday, but you tell me what you want and you will eventually get a quilt that you want. And so I can't remember if Lynn specifically picked this pattern, but she wanted black and white and a little bit of red. And I made this big, huge half square triangle kind of star quilt. They're 12-inch half square triangles. They're huge. And then just a little bit of red cotton steel speckle dots as the inner border, and I just love how it turned out. It's so cool. Next up is my Christmas quilt that lives here with me. And again, this is a quilt made up of cotton and steel Christmas fabrics and a mix of solids, and I just did a flying geese design on most of the blocks and left some as plain rectangles and mixed it up. And again, it was super simple, bright, fun, cheerful, and that's how I like my Christmas quilts. And then on the back of this one, I tried to use some of my favorite prints in big, in a big piece of yardage so I could look at them more. And one of those was the snow globes, which that was just my favorite. I wish I had yards and yards of that snow globe fabric. I love it so much. Next up is a little baby quilt for my nephew, Andy. And this one is the New Wave quilt that I mentioned earlier. And I used a black and white cotton and steel fat quarter bundle and mixed in some bright neon solids and just made him kind of like a little ombre black and white with some green and blue baby quilt, and I love how this one turned out. And then next up is the baby quilt that my mom pieced for Andy using the Hello Bear fabric line that was really popular at the time. They're so cute, and I long arm quilted this one for her. Next up is another Elizabeth Hartman quilt, and I'm blanking on the name for this one, so I'll put it up on the screen. I think it has something to do with sunset, and this is, I think, the first time I've ever made a quilt to the T exactly as the pattern states. Fabric colors, the size, all the same block. I mean, just everything to the T. I loved this quilt when she released it. I just was obsessed. And even though sometimes, or most of the time, I try to change things a little to make them my own, No, I wanted that exact quilt. I was like, what are your colors? And in the pattern, she included all the Kona colors that she used, and I loved it. So I followed it exactly, and this was my first queen size quilt, like fully queen size. I think 90 by 90, 96 by 96. It's big. And up until recently was one of my bed quilts. Now it lives in the guest room because we have a king size bed, but it's okay. I love it. Next up is another queen size quilt that I made for myself. And this is the Meadowland pattern by Then Came June. I love this pattern. I love putting this quilt together. The blocks are really fun and relatively quick to make. And I love the fabric combinations you can make, how you can kind of start with, a stack of fat quarters and combine them into a million different ways. This one I started with a Rifle Paper Company for cotton and steel fabric print that I loved. I think it was called Bon Voyage. I'll insert some photos and videos or whatever. But I started with that fabric print and then went online and to my local quilt store, and I pulled kind of, I don't want to call them low volume because they're not low volume in terms of color. I bought prints that were dominantly one color. So I wanted like an olivey green and an orange and a yellow and some pinks and reds. So they are prints, but they're subtle prints where the fabric reads kind of as a more solid color. I think you'll see that, you know, in the video in the picture of my quilt. And oh, I love this quilt so much. I especially love the backing. On this one, I did just use the extra wide backing because Moda had released some buffalo check backings, which Moda, please bring those back. This and on a Christmas quilt, you'll see in a minute. Oh, those buffalo check backings were like, what? Please bring them back, please. I need them. I will buy so many yards of them. Okay, next up is everyone in my family's favorite quilt. Everyone tries to steal it every time they're at my parents' house. And this is the Christmas quilt that I made for my mom, I think 2 years ago now. And it's great. It's just a huge 16-inch sawtooth star. And I made it with the Bonnie and Camille Vintage Holiday or Vintage Christmas. That line from 2 years ago. I bought a fat quarter bundle and figured out how I could make the most out of the printed fabrics with a little bit of white, and I love it. Love it so much. Everyone tries to steal that quilt from my mom, and she will let nobody except her and the grandkids use it. It's great. It's such a cool quilt. I need to make one for myself because I'm pretty jealous of it. Guys, I'm gonna leave audio on this one while I make fun of how you're just wrapped in it. You're not showing it to anybody. Here, take a picture of us all wrapped in it. And again, this was I made right around the same time as my Meadowland, and so they had that buffalo check available in the red, and it's perfect. It's perfect for a Christmas quilt. Moda, hear my cries. Next up is a Christmas quilt that I made for my sister Sarah the same year I made the one for my mom. I really got on a Christmas quilt kick and made 2 of them one year. And this one, again, I started with the backing fabric, and it is this really cool Alexander Henry kind of Southwest Christmas, cactus Christmas. And, you know, we're in Texas, so it's very thematically appropriate. And I pulled all of the colors from the front of the quilt. And actually, I shouldn't say I pulled. Cottoneer, I don't know if you know cottoneerfabrics.com. They're a great website. And they put together these fat quarter bundles. And that was a fat quarter bundle. And it matched so perfectly with that Alexander Henry print. And it was like meant to be. So I just made a half square triangle quilt. I believe they're 5 or 6 inch half square triangles. Maybe 4 inch, I think 4 inch actually. It's kind of a small, so I made a lot of half square triangles. I tried a few different methods, but I think my preferred method is just 2 at a time. So that's kind of how I threw all those together, and I love it. And this next quilt is a baby quilt I made for my brand new little niece Isla, who was born just 3 months ago. So I made this quilt probably about 6 to 8 months ago, and it is the Looper quilt from Miss Make. I will include a picture and link it in the description box because that is something you can still readily get. And I just wanted to make this super fun rainbow happy quilt. I found the Ruby Star Society white with the little stars, and I just pulled all the solids from those stars and made a happy rainbow. And yeah, it was such an adventure getting that quilt to Dubai. So my sister, I said, lives overseas, and with COVID and shipping, we couldn't even ship to the UAE for a little while. There just, you know, they weren't shipping things. And then we could, but it was going to be like $400 and something. And then finally, I think we had somebody traveling. One of her friends was going from Houston to Dubai. And I think we got, you know, the package on, I don't even remember all the logistics. Planes, trains, automobiles, all were involved. Finally, the quilt made it. She has it. She loves it. I love it. Next up is a quilt I finished just a few months ago, and this one is my sister Sarah's 30th birthday quilt. And these quilt blocks came out of Tula Pink's Is it called Modern Patchwork? I'll put a picture of the book up on the screen. It's got 100 quilt blocks in it, and originally I was going to make those 100 quilt blocks. And after around 20 or 25 or however many ended up in the quilt, I ran out of steam a little bit. But so I came up with a really cool, or at least I think it's really cool, way to sash and set up the blocks to give it a lot of negative space that I thought Sarah would really like. And so I put together the quilts, and just a short 2.5, 3 years later, she got her 30th birthday quilt. Oh, and this quilt is made with a lot of cotton and steel prints from around the 2015, 2016 timeframe. These actually were her fabric. She had bought them thinking she was going to make a quilt and never did. And then when we got around to her 30th birthday, and I was like, what quilt do you want to make? What quilt do you want me to make for you? And she was like, can you please just use those cotton and steel fabrics that I love and I've never done anything with and make a quilt? And I said, sure. So that's what I did for the quilt. And then the last quilt is the one you saw just a couple weeks ago, and that's my Halloween quilt. That one was made with the fig tree fabrics. The All Hallows Eve fig tree fabric jelly roll and Kona snow, and just a simple 9-patch Irish chain. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me through this quilt parade. I really hope you enjoyed it. That's just, I think, was that 25, 26 quilts that I've made over the last decade and a half. There's many more out there, but they've been gifted to various friends and family who were not easily accessible. So I gave you as many quilts as I could find. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you have any questions about any of the quilts or patterns, feel free to leave a comment below and I will do my best to answer. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.